All right, good afternoon. This is Chris Agulia, Waco MPO. I'd like to welcome everyone to the April 1st, 2021 Waco MPO Technical Committee meeting. We have a fairly short agenda today, but what we're going to do is first start off by verifying attendance of our technical committee members. Either Annette or Chelsea, do you feel prepared to just run through who we've got online today?
Sure. So I'm going to go in the order that they appear on my screen. So we have Frank Leos, Anthony Beach, Zane Dunham.
Here.
Amy Boularley Highland. I'm just going to read your name, and then I guess if I miss you, please let me know. Oh shoot, that's not working because the list is changing. Okay, so we have Anthony Beach, Christy Vonham.
Here.
Thank you. Christy Vonham.
Here.
Keith Bond. Amy Boularley Highland.
Here.
Amy's,
I did see her, yeah. Tom Dahl. I did see Tom. Mitch Davison. Tom Dixon. Zane Dunham.
Here.
Joseph Dvorsky. I saw Victor. I saw Joseph earlier.
Here.
Victor Goebel.
I'm here.
David Gonzalez. Brigida Gonzalez. I saw her. Jeff Jackson.
I'm here.
Jim Jaska. Frank Leos. We got you.
I'm here.
Thank you. Joe Martinez. Carl McNair.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Metters. Serena Stevenson.
Here.
Yeah, I saw Serena. Beatrice Wharton. Bee's here. I saw her. Debbie Tahiri.
Here.
Hi, Debbie. And then I don't think Clayton will be joining us today. I think that's right. Okay.
Thanks,
That
Chelsea.
was it.
And this
All right.
is Barbara Knightley, Federal Highway joining too.
Awesome,
Thanks, Barbara.
Barbara. Thank you.
Betcha.
All right, so the next part of this is the reading of any public comments that we may have received as part of this process. As of 10 o'clock this morning, the MPO staff has not received any requests to provide comments. So we will move on to the next item, which is discussing our next 2-year work program. And actually what's on this particular slide is a little bit misleading here. We're not actually talking about the draft of the actual document. What we're talking about is a little bit higher level discussion, and that is the work tasks that we're having an initial conversation about. And what we want to get some feedback from the technical committee on is what sort of things do you think the MPO needs to be working on over the next 2 fiscal years. So just as a reminder, the Unified Planning Work Program effectively serves as our operating budget. It's going to start for fiscal year 22, and this identifies how the MPO is going to be using the various federal planning dollars that come to this region, and on which work tasks and in what amounts. There's also some planning dollars that come to Waco Transit, and those dollars also have to be included in this document, and we also have to have some description about how those dollars are going to be used as well. And then under the federal program, the MPO is required that the MPO Policy Board agree that these are uses for which they intend to or that they agree with the use of these dollars for those particular work tasks. And then the final process in this is that we do get some confirmation from our federal partners and from the folks at TxDOT who have oversight responsibility over the MPO that these are eligible work tasks for these types of dollars. So there are a number of recurring tasks that will be within this document for year to year. Our standard administrative duties, such as supporting the MPO Technical Committee, our public involvement processes, even mundane things like how many pencils do we need to buy is included in that. There's also quite a bit of data management. There's a number of GIS layers and data sets that we maintain on a regular basis to support our planning functions. This upcoming year, we're going to have new traffic counts coming to us that were counted last year. And then also we have the decennial census results that we will be going through and analyzing to see how things have shifted and changed within our region in terms of population and a number of other metrics that are important to identifying how people get from point A to point B. We also include periodic reviews of our transportation plan and TIP. Those are living, breathing documents, and sometimes things change pretty significantly in terms of development patterns and in terms of priorities within those documents. And so we do periodic review annually of those processes. And then something else that we now do on an annual basis that we just finished up this past month is the whole consideration of various performance targets, whether we're adopting something for our region, specific to our region, or whether we're supporting targets that have been adopted by someone else. And then, of course, I mentioned previously the various planning activities that Waco Transit performs as well. So for this next 2-year period, the main areas of emphasis is we're already talking about a new transportation improvement program that would cover fiscal years 2023 through 2026. In fact, actually, probably by the end of this year, we're already having a conversation with the Waco district about which projects they're ready to move forward with during that 4-year time frame. And then probably very early next year, we'll have a similar conversation with the folks at Waco Transit on what kind of transit projects will be ready to move forward during that same period as well. And then usually we adopt a new TIP in the month of June. In this case, it'll be June of 2022. And then, of course, the UPWP being a 2-year document means that 2 years from now, we'll be going through another similar exercise with this work program. The thing that will also be new, something that we do on a once-a-decade process, is a review of our highway functional classification system. And that's something that Texas does after the decennial census. And so this is the time frame that we will probably be performing that function in cooperation with TxDOT and our partners at the Federal Highway Administration. So something that's kind of a wild card here is whether we will be transitioning to a transportation management area. The more data we receive, the more estimates that we see, the feeling is that this is more and more likely to actually occur, but we won't really know that for sure until about this time next year. But we want to, and while we're not necessarily going to be putting some of these tasks into the draft UPWP at this time, we're at least going to have this kind of in our pocket for a very quick amendment should that take place. And these are things that would be required of us if we transition to TMA status. So we would have to develop a congestion management plan. We also become eligible for certain new sources of money. We would actually have a sub-allocation of the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, a sub-allocation of the Transportation Alternative Program that the MPO Policy Board can actually directly fund projects with. Well, we need a process for determining how those dollars should be distributed. And so that would be the next, that would be something else that we would have to do quite a bit of work on. And there are a number of other smaller tasks that we would need to be looking at as well. But these are all things that we're going to keep in our back pocket for right now and be able to pull the trigger on very quickly should we find ourselves in a TMA designation. And I mentioned here spring of 2022. And just to remind you, once an area is designated as a TMA, we would have 12 months to comply with those new requirements. Now, in addition to that, there are a number of special studies that can be considered. The first one is not under consideration. This one is actually we're about ready to pull the trigger on start looking at. And I say we. This is a Waco Transit project that MPO is jointly funded with the MPO, and that's the route realignment study. Probably going to be recruiting a consultant on that probably next month. And of course, that's probably a 9-month process. And so that'll carry over into the next fiscal year. There's also a request that's been made of the MPO to do a corridor study of LaSalle Avenue. There's some talk about that in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And this also bubbled up as part of the public involvement from the development of that plan a couple of years ago. There's also been a lot of interest that was expressed about that corridor when we developed our active transportation plan back in 2019. And so that's something that we'll at least add to the list of things that could be considered. And then there's a vision scenario exercise. This is something similar to what the MPO did about 15 years ago. And the main questions are, how is the region going to grow and change between now and the next planning horizon for our transportation plan, which is going to be the year 2050? This is actually kind of a good time to be asking some of these questions. And especially because we're looking at some really transformative changes in how we get from point A to point B as a result of new technologies. And so the purpose behind a scenario exercise like this would be to look at and assess various different options or possibilities and have a conversation about what's some of the promises, what are some of the trade-offs, what are some of the current concerns? And then through everything that we do, we want to have a conversation about equity and making sure that all persons within our region are benefiting from these new technologies and these new or these changes in growth. And then we want to also have a conversation about how ready are we to accept these new technologies and benefit from these new technologies. Both of these studies probably are minimally about $250,000 in terms of cost. Yes, we do have resources available to do both. What we don't necessarily have is the staff to manage both at the same time. So if this is something that the MPO's technical committees thinks we ought to be working on, then we need to stagger these so that we have the ability to manage these two studies appropriately. And then finally, we're also looking at adding a staff position during the next 2 years. We're looking at a public information specialist to make sure that we're performing the necessary tasks that are identified with our public participation plan. Not just that we're performing those, but that we're performing those to a very high level. And so we want to make sure that we're doing really good outreach to our environmental justice communities, that we're doing outreach to our Spanish-speaking communities, and that we're actively getting their input into this process. We also want to make sure that we're using the very latest techniques for outreach and make sure that we're not missing folks who maybe use one method or not using another method. And then, and I mentioned about Spanish speakers, we want to make sure that we have someone who's fluent in Spanish as part of our staff. So because we're having more and more interaction with folks who that is their primary language of choice. And so we want to make sure that they understand what some of the actions and activities are being proposed by the MPO Policy Board. And then finally, to also make sure that we have someone that can assist us when we're preparing for Policy Board, Tech Committee, work group meetings. Yeah, we already have a timeline identified for a draft document, and we're aiming for the end of April to have that ready and then to be able to solicit comments on that document. We did make a change to our public process, so we're doing a 30-day comment period as opposed to the 45-day comment period that we had previously. But we still have the requirement for 2 public informational meetings, and those are proposed in early May. And right now, the proposal is to have the policy board consider adoption of the new document on June 17th. But what we would like to do is to just open it up to the technical committee to get some feedback on what we've presented to you, and also to see are there any other things that you think the MPO needs to be looking at, even if it's not for this next 2-year period. Are there other things that need to be on our radar screen for future work programs as well? And hopefully this isn't a situation where someone's speaking and they're on mute. We have a little bit of time if something comes to mind. So we're looking at developing this draft document over the next next 3 weeks or so. And then getting this out to the public for review. So if something comes to mind during that time period, please feel free to reach out to MPO staff, and we can have that considered by the MPO Policy Board as we put together the final document. All right, well, let's move on to the next topic, which is TxDOT is looking at some changes to how they estimate project costs. This is kind of coming out of the last TIP-STIP process. And one of the things that they want to do is have a more robust procedure for making sure that project costs are fairly accurate before we get too far down the road in terms of looking for financial commitments for these projects. So basically, we're trying to avoid last-minute surprises, which sometimes can lead to a delay in a project actually moving forward. And so Victor Gable from the Waco District is going to walk us through this. And Victor, I think I've got the slides here. So if you just let me know when you're ready to move forward to the next slide, I'll go ahead and take care of that.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. So like Chris said, we're talking about coming up with a new methodology of basically coming up with more, like I said, robust estimates that look at total project cost versus just what typically has been happening is looking at the low bid cost. So a little background before we get into the presentation. So like I said, traditionally authorized amounts, they were set up anticipated low bid at project inception. So these estimates, they're really rough and they're typically based on a kind of cost per mile type approach from similar projects. They typically didn't include inflation, project refinements, contingencies, change orders, or any other kind of allowances that are typically involved in a project. And because of this, for the Cat 2, 4, and 12 projects, Category 1 was always the backstop. That was the open line of funding that we had to use to pick up these overages, since Categories 2, 4, and 12 are not allowed to be an open line of funding within TxDOT Connect.
Yeah. And
Category
Victor,
one, yeah.
Victor, just real quick, maybe remind the committee of what is category 1.
That was my next sentence, Chris. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, so I was going to say category 1, it's our district's preventative maintenance funds. We use these for projects like seal coats, pavement rehabs, widenings, adding shoulder projects, stuff like that. The bread and butter stuff that keeps the maintenance going on our roads. And years ago, when the MPOs didn't have access to these large Prop 1 and 7 funds, it wasn't an issue to use the Cat 1 as a backstop because, you know, these big mega projects were few and far between. However, you know, now that we're building these not just mega projects, but multiple mega projects within both of the MPOs, it's not uncommon to get a change order that comes through every now and then that's, you know, $1 million or multiple millions of dollars that ends up taking a hit on the Cat 1 budget in order to cover that amount. So when that happens, we usually have to either cancel a scheduled rehab project to pick up that cost. And sometimes that rehab project's not even within that MPO's boundaries. So not only are they losing their maintenance project, they're not even benefiting from the overage that's coming from the major MPO project. So this has been an issue statewide. This isn't something that we're doing just in the Waco district. It's an initiative that's put on by TPD and TPP divisions in Austin, and they're implementing this new method. So this first slide here, here's what we're showing is the estimate funnel over time. So when a project's initially planned, the base estimate will be more on the low end, and the contingencies are going to be a little bit on the higher end. You know, this is because at this phase, the project, there's a lot more unknowns than knowns. You know, we may have a basic cost per mile, but we don't actually have, you know, how many cubic yards of concrete is going to be in this project, or how many square yards of hot mix, so on and so forth. It's just kind of a really rough estimate, but then we have to be covered with the contingencies. As you can see, as the project progresses and we get into the design details, that's when we start further refining our estimate, and we eliminate most of the contingencies up to letting. So the goal is at the very beginning of the project, capturing all those contingencies, but at the same time being as close as we can to the final total cost of the project at the end. Next slide. So what is a contingency and the related allowances? On this slide, you can see how the project cost details break down. You have the base estimate, that's the actual roadway items derived from a plan set at the top of the form. Then you have the contingencies, which are made up of the safety contingency, change order, contingency, incentives, disincentives, and other force account work on the bottom. So we rarely do use incentives on projects, but they are available for projects that either need the whole project fast tracked, or we can dive down and look at specific pieces of the project to fast track it and put incentives and disincentives on there for the contractor. So each of these items, they default to specific percentages of the construction estimate, but they are adjustable to an extent depending on what project type we're looking at. Next slide. So on this slide, each contingency, there's a little bit more explanation about what each one is and kind of the base percentages that they start at. For instance, you can see on the safety contingency, there's a range of 2 to 5% that can be used. We also have the change order contingency, and it kind of describes a little bit about the incentives and disincentives that we can look at. It goes into detail on force account work, total contingency, construction estimate, and then at the bottom, the construction estimate without the joint bid. Next slide. So this slide shows how the inflation is calculated on projects. Projects more than 24 months out from letting will get a 4% inflation rate per year, maxed out at 12% for 3 years or more. As the projects advance and get closer to letting and move up year by year, those inflation rates will change, but at the same time, on our end, we need to start refining those estimates and get those closer and closer as we can. So the cost should be changing as we get closer to letting with a better pinpoint of accuracy. So that way, what we don't fall into the trap of is when we start planning projects that may be 5, 6, 7, 8 years out, we come up with an estimate of $50 million. And in the past, that 50 million has stuck with those projects all for those 8 years out up until letting. Then when we get to letting, you know, we run into a brick wall, like Chris was saying. Well, we're a little surprised because $50 million 8 years ago is not the same amount of construction that you get $50 million now. Next slide. So this is a example project. This is actually the mall-to-mall project that we have in TxDOT Connect. As you can see, it's showing an estimate of $44.5 million, safety contingency of 2% at $890,000. You got a change order contingency of 5.3% at $2.3 million, and then we are incentivizing this project with the $2 million available bonus. So the overall construction estimate comes out to about $49.76 million. Now, right now, this project is showing a 4% inflation adding on to get to $51.7 million, but I believe when we pulled this slide, since then that inflation has come off, so it shouldn't be at 51.7. But whatever that final amount it is, whether it does have the inflation tagged on or not, that's what needs to go into the tip, as well as it's going to have the Cat 2 placeholder within the UTP. So let's just say, for example, this project does have that inflation amount on there. When the project lets, it's going to have the 51.7 million tied to the project. And at this point, Cat 1 is still the open line of funding. So when the projects close out, if it takes more than the initial 51.75, the carryover will be picked up by Cat 1 at that point. However, at project closeout, when the project's done, if it's less than the 51.75, then those remaining Cat 2 funds are going to roll back into the MPO Cat 2 coffers. So at this point, you're probably thinking, what does this mean for the MPO? And it's probably obvious that these estimates that we're going to be doing on these projects from here on out are going to be higher than they have been in the past, which is going to ultimately mean we're going to have to be constrained based on the Cat 2 allowance that the MPO gets. So overall, that's probably going to mean less projects actually funded and programmed at one time. That doesn't mean we're getting less funds, but what it means is we're looking at, like I said, the total project cost. The Cat 2 funds will cover the entire cost of it. So that's kind of where we're looking at. And if you want to go to the next slide, Chris. If there's any questions on this, I'll be happy to field them as best I can.
Anyone have any questions?
All right, that's an easy crowd.
Yeah, I guess you nailed it.
All right,
Well,
thanks, Chris.
Sure, and as always, if a question comes to mind from the technical committee, feel free to forward that to us, and we'll get you an answer on it. All right, so the next item is the TxDOT construction update, and so Jeff Jackson is going to be presenting this to us. And Jeff, I guess you have the slide deck on your end.
That's correct. Yeah, I can share.
Okay, let me stop here, and it's all yours.
All right. I think y'all seeing that all right? Okay, good. So these drone photos are super old. They're from last Tuesday. So we'll kind of go through these and kind of see what kind of progress we're making. Here's view looking south towards 17th Street. This past couple of weeks, or I guess months since we talked last time, they've opened up the northbound frontage road there between 17th Street and 4th and 5th. I mean the northbound frontage road. So that's opened up again. We've got the on-ramp opened up so people can get onto the main lanes going northbound there. Here's looking north at 11th and 12th. You can see the northbound frontage road, they've got that open, making good progress on getting all that tied in. Here's looking at 11th and 12th Street. That's kind of been the same status there for a little bit. Most of the work's been going out north of here. Here's looking at the 4th and 5th Street intersection, the new exit ramp. I think since last time we spoke, we've switched traffic, all traffic to the new southbound main lane between 17th, 18th Street and there at Forest. So the traffic's on that new pavement now. We've got all the ramps tied in there. So here's a look at the 4th and 5th Street exit ramp there going northbound. Again, here's looking back south from 4th and 5th. Here we're looking at University Parks. Like I said, this is from last Tuesday. Since then, the University Parks bridge that you're seeing in this photo has been demolished, as well as the 4th and 5th Street northbound bridge. They've removed it as well, and I believe they've got that open back up now. Here we're looking at over the river. They've also got the deck off of that northbound bridge, so that one should be down in a week or so completely. And then here's MLK. They also have the MLK bridge down. So within a couple of weeks of getting switched, they've gotten 3 or 4 different bridges down already. So they're, as usual, moving right along. Here's looking north at 4th Street. So you can kind of see this one in the next picture here. That northbound frontage road north of MLK to 4th Street's been closed for a while. So you can see they've got the bond breaker in and everything's ready to pave. Now that they've switched traffic on the north end, or they've got the concrete paving on the north end for all the new southbound main lanes, their paving crews are moving back to do some of these side street tie-ins. One is the tie-in there at Bellmead Drive, and they'll be moving over here to get the paving done at 4th Street. So hopefully get that opened up at some point too. Here's looking at 77. As you can see, as they move in to get the tie-in done at Bellmead Drive there, we should be looking at getting the traffic over that new frontage road at some point in the next month or so. So making progress there. And then as you can see at the top of the screen there, that's what our current crossover is. The plan last night was to switch all the remaining traffic north of that crossover location over the new southbound main lanes. Didn't quite make it last night, so they're going to try again for tonight. So hopefully southbound traffic will be over on completely new pavement from one end of the job to the other tomorrow morning. And then hopefully next week or the week after, they'll be looking to move the rest of northbound over. And then all traffic will be on new pavement while they switch to the third phase and start putting in all the new northbound main lanes. Here's a look going at 84 here. You can see they've got that braided ramp poured for that southbound exit to 77 there in Elm Street, and they've got the on-ramp there as well. So that once we get traffic switched over the next, tonight and the next week, those ramps will open back up, or open up for the first time as they're new. So I think that'll be a good benefit. Here's looking at some more of the new paving that we'll have traffic on tonight. All things go smoothly, but like I said, they've made a lot of progress since these pictures a little over a week ago. Here's looking at Barron Circle, looking north. And that's all I've got there. Like I said, the focus for this this week is getting that traffic switched. Once we get traffic switched there, like they'll move back, getting some of these side streets tied in, some of the frontage road work that's been kind of sitting for a while. I know down the south end of the job, getting some of the 8th, 9th Street tie-ins done. That'll be on their radar, trying to get those knocked out as well. So hopefully we can see some of that come together, and pretty soon all the impacts on the frontage road ought to be wrapped up for the most part, and they'll be free to just complete the main lanes.
Great. Anyone have any questions for Jeff? Easy crowd today. Jeff, thank you as always. We always appreciate these updates.
Sure thing.
All right. So right now we're proposing the next technical committee meeting tentatively to be Thursday, June 3rd. And while we have the note here about being virtual for the foreseeable future, we actually do have a game plan now for the possibility of returning to in-person meetings. The city of Waco has put out some guidance on what thresholds the region would need to meet in order for that to occur. It's based on the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated. Right now, I think they're looking at the city council, the Waco City Council meeting in person in the month of May. And so if we meet those certain thresholds, and I forget what the exact percentages are, but from what I remember, we should be meeting those sometime within the next couple of weeks. So there is a possibility that this meeting could be conducted in person, but that the public may still have to participate virtually. That would, for the public to be able to attend in person, we would have to meet the next threshold, which is probably not likely to be met until maybe sometime later in June, perhaps July is the estimate that the Public Health District was providing to us. So we'll keep you up to speed on that as we negotiate this, and we'll give you plenty of time to be able to react to that. So before we adjourn, let me just see if anyone has any questions about the next meeting. Okay, well, I hope everyone has a good holiday weekend.